Have you ever wondered how a country can steal mountains of treasure, control a global empire, and still end up broke? Because that is exactly what happened to Spain. When people think about Spain in the 1500s and 1600s, they imagine conquistadors, treasure fleets, and endless silver pouring in from the Americas. And that image is not completely wrong. Spain really did gain access to enormous mineral wealth, especially from silver mines in places like Potosí in modern Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico. So the obvious question is this: if Spain had so much silver, why did it keep going bankrupt? It sounds impossible. If money solves problems, Spain should have been unstoppable. It should have become permanently richer, stronger, and more dominant than the rest of Europe. Instead, it became one of history's clearest warnings that sudden wealth can make a country look powerful, while quietly weakening it from the inside. This is the story of how one of the richest empires in the world got trapped by its own treasure. To understand what went wrong, we need to start with what Spain actually gained. After conquering large parts of the Americas, Spain plugged itself into an enormous flow of bullion. Huge quantities of silver crossed the Atlantic. In theory, this should have transformed Spain into the most durable superpower in Europe. It should have funded stronger institutions, industry, infrastructure, and long-term prosperity. And at first, it did make Spain look unbeatable. Under the Habsburgs, Spain became one of the great powers of early modern Europe. It controlled territory in the Americas, in parts of Italy, in the Low Countries, and elsewhere across the globe. On the surface, this looked like the jackpot of empire. But there was a hidden weakness. Spain did not become rich in the healthiest way. It did not grow rich mainly by building strong domestic industry, broad commercial networks, or a balanced tax system at home. Instead, a huge part of its strength came from imported silver. And that difference matters. There is a big difference between wealth you produce and wealth you extract. Produced wealth usually comes from farms, workshops, trade, finance, shipbuilding, technology, and institutions that keep generating value year after year. Extracted wealth feels easier. You seize mines, you take tribute, you grab treasure. For a while, it looks like you have found a shortcut. But shortcuts create bad habits. That is what happened to Spain. The crown received so much silver that it became easier to spend than to reform. Why fix the tax system if treasure fleets keep arriving? Why invest in domestic production if you can just buy what you need? Why make painful changes at home if silver from overseas keeps covering the immediate problem? This is where the silver trap begins. Spain had silver, but silver is not the same thing as a productive economy. Think of it like this. If someone suddenly inherits a fortune, that does not automatically make them disciplined, efficient, or wise. They might simply become a reckless spender with more confidence. Spain did something similar on an imperial scale. The monarchy spent vast sums on war, and not just one war. War after war after war. Spain fought to defend its territories, maintain Habsburg influence, suppress revolts in the Netherlands, confront the Ottoman Empire, compete with France, and preserve its reputation as Europe's dominant Catholic power. All of this was incredibly expensive. Armies had to be paid, ships had to be built, Fortresses had to be maintained. Mercenaries had to be hired. Supplies had to be bought. Debts had to be serviced. Silver came in, but much of it went straight back out. In fact, a lot of it was already gone before it even arrived. This is one of the most important parts of the story. Spain's kings borrowed heavily against future silver shipments. They treated incoming treasure like guaranteed future income, and used it as collateral for loans from powerful bankers, many of them outside Spain. So when the silver fleets arrived, a large share of that wealth was already committed. That meant Spain had the appearance of fabulous wealth without the financial security you would expect from a truly stable economy. The empire looked rich, but it was often short of cash. It looked dominant, but it was under constant pressure from debt. And then came inflation. As huge quantities of silver entered the European economy, prices rose over time. Historians often call this the price revolution. More silver in circulation helped push up the cost of goods. Everyday life became more expensive. Wages often failed to keep pace. Governments found that their old assumptions about money no longer worked. Spain was at the center of this process. So the silver that was supposed to make Spain stronger also helped make everything more expensive. The crown still received treasure, but the cost of running an empire kept rising. Feeding armies cost more. Equipping fleets cost more. Paying officials cost more. Maintaining power became more expensive just as Spain became more dependent on silver. So Spain faced a double problem. First, it depended too heavily on imported bullion. Second, the abundance of bullion helped fuel inflation, which made imperial power more expensive to sustain. And the situation became even worse because Spain imported many of the goods it needed. Instead of using imperial wealth to build a broad and competitive manufacturing base, Spain often spent silver on foreign products. Textiles, weapons, financial services, and other critical goods frequently came from more commercially dynamic parts of Europe. So, while silver flowed into Spain from the Americas, much of the long-term economic benefit flowed back out to foreign bankers, merchants, and producers. Spain had the mines. Others often got the business. This is one of the great ironies of economic history. Spain controlled a river of treasure, but treasure alone did not guarantee a strong economy at home. In some ways, easy silver may even have delayed reform. Governments under pressure sometimes modernize because they have no other choice. They improve taxation, administration, production, and finance because survival demands it. But when wealth keeps arriving from overseas, rulers can postpone difficult changes. They can choose short-term relief over long-term strength. That is exactly what Spain kept doing. And there was another problem: social values. In early modern Spain, aristocratic ideals often placed more prestige on land, honor, military service, and noble status than on commerce or manufacturing. That did not mean trade did not exist. It did. But the culture did not always reward productive enterprise in the same way that some other rising European powers increasingly did. And that matters. If a society values inherited prestige more than economic innovation, it can struggle to turn wealth into durable growth. Spain had imperial glory, but glory is not an economic strategy. Then came the bankruptcies. This is the part that surprises people most. Spain did not go broke because there was suddenly no silver at all. It went broke because the crown repeatedly could not meet its financial obligations in a sustainable way. In other words, the monarchy defaulted more than once because its spending and debt commitments had become larger than its system could reliably support. That is a very different kind of poverty. Spain was not poor in raw resources. It was poor in fiscal balance. It had a revenue stream that looked gigantic from a distance, but it was unstable up close. The monarchy was trying to finance a superpower lifestyle with an economy that was less resilient than it appeared. And that is where the myth completely falls apart. People assume that if a country steals a fortune, it should stay rich forever. But money is not the same as wealth. Money can arrive suddenly. Wealth has to be organized. It has to be protected by institutions. It has to be renewed by production. It has to be managed by a government that understands the difference between income and a temporary windfall. Spain got the windfall. It never fully fixed the system. And then there was the cost of empire itself. Empires are expensive. Very expensive. You do not just conquer territory and collect profits forever. You have to defend trade routes, guard shipping lanes, suppress rebellions, manage officials, fund navies, and fight rivals who want what you have. The larger the empire becomes, the more it can turn into a machine that consumes wealth simply to keep existing. Spain's empire was enormous, but size creates maintenance costs. So, paradoxically, silver made Spain powerful enough to take on huge burdens, and those burdens helped consume the silver. That is one reason imperial decline can be hard to spot in real time. A state can still look magnificent from the outside. It still has colonies, armies, fleets, palaces, and ceremonies. But internally, the numbers are getting worse. Debt rises, prices rise, dependence deepens, flexibility shrinks. The empire becomes rich and fragile at the same time. That was Spain. Now, to be fair, we should not make the story too simple. Silver did not destroy Spain all by itself. Spain remained a major power for a long time. It still had military strength, political influence, and a vast imperial presence. This was not an instant collapse. The real story is slower, more complicated, and more interesting. Silver amplified Spain's existing weaknesses. It encouraged overreach. It made borrowing easier. It reduced pressure for reform. It fueled inflation. And it tied the monarchy to a stream of wealth that looked endless until its limits became painfully clear. That is why Spain's problem was not simply greed, it was dependence. And that is what makes this story feel surprisingly modern. History repeats this lesson in many different forms. Countries that rely too heavily on one source of wealth, whether it is silver, oil, gas, or some other easy windfall, can start to confuse revenue with strength. They neglect production. They delay reform. They spend as if the boom will last forever. And when pressure arrives, they discover that being rich on paper is not the same thing as being resilient in reality. Spain learned that lesson the hard way. It stole vast amounts of silver. It commanded one of the greatest empires on earth. It terrified rivals. It shaped continents. And still, it kept running out of room. Because the real engine of lasting wealth was never the treasure ship. It was the system behind it. The states that grew stronger over the long run were not always the ones that seized the biggest pile of silver first. They were often the ones that built better financial systems, broader tax bases, more adaptive commercial institutions, and more productive economies. Spain had the glitter. Others built the machinery. And that is the real answer to the question. Spain went broke after stealing so much silver because silver made it look richer than it really was. The empire spent too much, borrowed too aggressively, fought too many wars, imported too much, reformed too little, and relied on treasure instead of building a durable economic foundation. In other words, Spain did not fail because it had too little money. It failed because it misunderstood what money could do. And that may be one of the oldest financial lessons in history.